The Veyrak training grounds on the moon of Ethros 4 smelled of iron dust and old fear. Kale Vera had trained soldiers for 11 cycles. Velthari soldiers. Drovan soldiers. Once, memorably, a pair of Krex warriors who had nearly torn the barracks apart on their first night simply because someone had placed their food bowls too close together. Kale had seen rage, pride, cowardice, brilliance, and everything in between. He had seen species who communicated through scent, species who slept upside down from the ceiling rafters, species whose young were already larger than most adult humans before they had learned to walk. He had never trained a human. When the transfer order came through his terminal, Cadet Mara Ellison, Sol System, Terran Defense Exchange Program, Kale had stared at it for a long moment, then pulled up the standard species briefing file on humans. He'd read it before, of course. Everyone in the Interstellar Coalition had read the human files. They were required reading now, after the siege of Gorath Station. The file said, moderate physical capability, exceptional endurance, high psychological resilience, notable for irrational persistence in the face of near-certain failure. Kale had translated that last line in his own mind, they don't know when to stop. He had considered it a warning. Mara Ellison arrived on a transport shuttle with 43 other cadets, and Kale spotted her immediately, not because she stood out physically, though she was lean and angular in the way humans often were, her dark hair pulled back with ruthless practicality, but because of the cubs. The Velthari cubs had come to watch the new arrivals. They always did. The juvenile Velthari, with their wide gold eyes and their spotted coats and their endless, boundless curiosity, were technically not supposed to be near the arrival pad. They were technically supposed to be in their learning dens with their senior caregivers. They were, technically, the children of the senior staff and the long-term station soldiers, and they were technically not Kale's problem. Technically. In practice, the cubs went wherever they wanted. They were fast, they were clever, and every adult Velthari on the base had long since made peace with the reality that a curious cub could not be stopped by a locked door, a stern voice, or even, on one memorable occasion, an electrified fence. There were 7 of them crowded at the edge of the pad, their small tails lashing with excitement, watching the new cadets disembark. And then Mara Ellison stepped off the shuttle. The cubs went absolutely still. Kale watched it happen. He had no explanation for it, the human did nothing remarkable. She stepped down the ramp, squinted against Ethros's pale sun, rolled her neck until it made an audible cracking sound that made the Drovan cadet beside her flinch, and then looked around at her surroundings with the calm, assessing expression of someone cataloging a space they intended to survive. And then one of the cubs, the youngest, barely past her first molt, a little spotted female the station had started calling Pip because she made small high sounds when startled, bolted. She ran directly at Mara Ellison. The other 6 cubs followed immediately, in the way that young Velthari always followed each other into disaster, because it was always better to face danger as a pack. Kale was already moving, bracing himself for the collision, for the human cadet to shriek or stumble or swing defensively as 40 kilograms of excited juvenile predator launched itself directly at her chest. Mara caught Pip. Not stumbled backward and caught. Not fell down and accidentally caught. She caught the cub cleanly, bent her knees to absorb the impact, tucked the small spotted body against her chest, and made a soft sound, a low, rumbling, wordless sound from somewhere in her throat, that Kale did not have a name for. Pip went limp with pleasure. The other 6 cubs arrived and immediately began climbing the human's legs, her arms, attempting to scale her like she was a structure specifically designed for this purpose. Mara turned slowly, distributing her attention among them with a focus that Kale had seen in experienced handlers, professionals who had spent years learning the needs of Velthari young. Okay, one at a time, she was saying, and her voice had that same low, easy quality, like something patient that had decided to be patient on purpose. You're going to knock me over. Not that I'd mind, but your commander looks like it might bother him. Kale realized he was standing 3 meters away with his mouth slightly open. He closed it. The first week of training was designed to break cadets down. This was not cruelty, it was architecture. You stripped away what a soldier thought they were, and then you found out what they actually were. Some species crumbled. Some raged. Some dissociated in ways that required medical intervention. Mara Ellison did none of these things. She struggled. Cale watched her struggle with complete attention, because it was unlike any struggling he had seen before. When the Velthari cadets hit a wall, physically, mentally, they either pushed through it on pack momentum or they collapsed and waited to be retrieved. When the Droven hit walls, they became dangerous. When the Kreks hit walls, they simply stopped and reassessed until they found a different wall to go around. When Mara hit a wall, she got quieter. Not defeated quiet. Not broken quiet. Something else. She pulled inward like she was having a conversation with herself, like she was negotiating with some interior part of herself that had more authority than the rest, and then she came back out the other side of the wall and continued. On the fourth day, she failed the long dark run. Every cadet failed it on the first attempt. The run was designed to be failed, to see how a cadet processed failure, to observe the response and the recovery. Most cadets fell apart for at least a cycle day. Some for longer. Mara sat down at the edge of the track in the dark, drank her water ration in controlled sips, and then asked Cale, "What was my time?" He told her. She nodded. "What's the record?" He told her that too. She looked at the track. "I'm going to run it again. Rest period is mandatory. After the mandatory rest." She met his eyes, and there was something in her expression that Cale had no word for in Velthari. It was not arrogance. It was not denial. It was something closer to a decision that had been made so thoroughly that it had become a fact. "I'm going to run it again, and I'm going to cut 12 minutes off my time, and then I'm going to run it again after that." Cale said nothing. She cut 14 minutes off her time. On the 9th day, Pip found a way into the cadet barracks. This was not surprising. What was surprising was that Pip had brought 4 of the other cubs with her, and they had collectively constructed a sleeping pile in Mara's bunk that the human had apparently discovered at lights out, looked at for a long moment, and then simply climbed into without disturbing any of them. Cale found out about this the next morning when he came to issue the wake call and found Mara already up, already in training clothes, doing something called push-ups in the narrow strip of floor beside her bunk while 5 cubs slept in her blankets. "Cadet Ellison," he said. "Sir," she said, not stopping. "There are cubs in your bunk." "Yes, sir." "Regulations state that personal sleeping spaces are to be kept." "Sir," she said, and finally stopped, sitting back on her heels and looking up at him with that calm, assessing expression. "They were cold. And they came to me. I'm not going to turn away cold cubs." Cale looked at the sleeping pile. Pip had her small nose tucked under the chin of the largest cub. They were all breathing in sync. He thought about the file. Notable for irrational persistence in the face of near-certain failure. He thought about the long dark run. He thought about the way Mara had caught Pip, cleanly, without hesitation, bending her knees to absorb the impact like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Dismissed," he said. He said nothing about the cubs. On the final day of the first training cycle, when Cale posted the cadet evaluations, the Velthari senior staff gathered to read the scores the way they always did, with commentary, with argument, with the casual competitive pride that marked every aspect of Velthari professional life. They reached Mara Ellison's scores and went quiet. Not the quiet of confusion or surprise. The quiet of something recognized. Old Sergeant Yeva, who had trained soldiers for 30 cycles and had seen things that gave younger Velthari nightmares, looked at the scores and then looked at Cale. "The human," she said. "Yes," said Cale. "She'll make commander before her 3rd cycle." Cale thought about the long dark run. He thought about Pip in her bunk. He thought about the way Mara looked at obstacles, not with fear, not with contempt, but with that quiet, settled, utterly unshakable certainty, like a creature that had looked at the universe and decided, long ago, that whatever it threw at her, she was going to be fine. Yes, he said again. She will. In the distance, from the direction of the barracks, they could hear the faint sound of cubs laughing.